I'm the only one in my office. I'm in our video room. I don't have a video producer. I don't have a technical person. I don't have anything. So I'm doing this on my own because of the stay-at-home order. We wanted our team to be safe. I talk to a lot of business owners. I work with a lot of CHROs, business leaders, and I was just getting an absolute influx of calls. What do we do? How do we do this? I also work with a team of about 10 entrepreneurs here in Southeastern Michigan that are just struggling. I think we all are having issues. And the question kept coming up, as leaders or as either business leaders or as HR leaders, what do we need to do in a time like this pandemic to try to keep things together? I mean, we know there's going to be businesses that go out. We know that there's going to be people that are laid off, let go, and so on. But in the meantime, how do we do leadership in this time of crisis? Now, the things that I'm going to share over the next 4 weeks are not out of a book. They're not philosophical. I went through, and my team went through, what happened in 2008. We went through, some of us, the dot-com bubble in 2001. And really what I'm going to share are the learnings that I had, the things that I did wrong, and that I learned from in 2008 that I'm trying to apply in a different way, especially because of what's going on, because it's a scary time for everybody. And I wrote down all of these things to share with those that were asking me. And it was at that point that I decided, you know what, I'm just going to go out and share it with anybody. And maybe you can take something away from this that'll help you as a leader, that'll help your leader if you're an HR person or really anybody else within an organization, because the reality of this is it's not easy for anybody. And even though I learned some things in 2008, what we have going on right now still cuts really deep, still causes challenges of companies of any size. I mean, that's why our government is talking about bailing out the airlines, the hotel industry, the restaurant industry. There's just so many that are already hurting. Here's the reality of it. The situation that we have for you, for me, it sucks. But depending on how we lead, it might be able to suck a little bit less. And that's really the whole point behind this. When we get into times like this, our teams, our organization are looking to us as leaders, as HR leaders, as business leaders, whatever role you're in, even as a peer, they're looking to us to step up and to provide some level of clarity and to have some type of process around the decision-making that we do that affects the company, that affects individuals. So here's what I'm going to do over the next 4 sessions. These will be 30 to 40 minutes. You can see if you need to jump off, that's fine. You'll get a link to the recording of it, which you could watch on demand. But today we're going to talk a little bit about how we do decision-making in times of a crisis, how I'm doing it differently than 2008, because it seems to be making a difference. Again, it's not easy. It still hurts. But it does seem to be making a difference with our team, and I think can make a difference with your team. Next week, Thursday at 11 o'clock, we'll be talking about communication in times of crisis. And I'm going to hit on 4 or 5 key areas. What are we communicating to our teams? Who are we communicating what information to? How are we communicating? And then this last one, which is really something that I've had to struggle with a bit, or really kind of wrestle with, not really struggle, is the cost of transparency, right? As leaders, we want to show that we're strong and so on, and we don't want to communicate too much information at times. And that's how I played in 2008. And if you see any of the comments from my team online, on LinkedIn or on Facebook, you can see that we've taken a very different approach here in 2020 and are really sharing just about everything. And why is that? And we'll talk about that. The third week, we'll talk about, okay, everybody's remote now. We were not in a situation where we had a lot of people working remote. We had to make the call. And within 24 hours, we had to get people to their homes. We had to get them laptops, those that didn't have it. Luckily, we have the technology infrastructure to do it. But then now what? How do you, as a leader or leaders within your organization, continue to maintain that connection, inspire your teams to perform, maintain, or even increase productivity, we have found that we're at least at par, if not better than we were when we were all sitting here in one of our multiple offices. And then what happens after the pandemic? Does this remote working stay for those organizations that didn't traditionally do it? We'll be talking and looking at all of that. And some of this is just my own perspective. Keep that in mind. And then the last of the 4 sessions, as I have them laid out right now, is planning for leadership after the pandemic. What happens when this is gone? I mean, I take it from a biblical perspective, right? It's kind of, this too shall pass. That was all the way from back then. This is going to pass at some point. The question is, what do we do afterwards? But in the midst of crisis, as leaders, what are we doing today to make sure we're set up for success? What am I doing today to make sure we're set up for success when this thing turns around? And then how do we find and how are we looking at creating opportunities in the midst of crisis? So that'll be week number 4. Depending on if there's more coming up, I'm happy to continue the series if it's helpful to you. But again, keep in mind that this is kind of from my perspective. So let's jump into this thing so I can at least hit the 5 points I want to make sure we get across today. Number 1 is this decision-making in times of crisis. 2 weeks ago, I'm looking around as if there's somebody in my office here. There's not. 2 weeks ago, we were on track to have the best year ever at Qualigence International and the Recruitment Education Institute. And we were doing some cool stuff. We had 2 sessions going where I was training our executive team on leadership principles, and then opened up a second class to a broader team of those that were either emerging leaders, new leaders, or just wanted to increase their leadership ability. We were adding sales team members. We were doing all kinds of really cool stuff about 2, maybe 2.5 weeks ago. And then in 10 days, you know the story, right? You're living it right now. Everything basically fell apart. But here's the thing. Even in the midst of all this falling apart, as leaders, as anybody really within any organization, leadership doesn't stop. It actually becomes more critical. And the focus on how we make decisions and how we look at decisions, in my opinion, becomes even more critical because people are watching. There's a saying that I've been using the last couple of days that in time, crisis in general is the great exaggerator. Meaning if you're a really strong leader or if you work for a really strong leader, usually in times of crisis, that strength, that warrior will kind of come out. And it's kind of reassuring to watch somebody. But here's the other piece of that. If we're still working on our leadership skills and abilities, which I believe we all are, the gaps that we have also get exaggerated. So crisis, to me, is the great exaggerator, both in the highs of the highs and the lows of the lows. And I had to take a look at that and take it to heart as we began to see things falling apart in the industries that we serve and really the entire United States, and things come to a screeching halt. So here's the first of the 5 points that I want to get across, and I'm going to give you some practical application of what we're trying to do here. And I hope that it's working. And if you're one of our team, please feel free to comment on this. If you have something to say, use the chat box. You can even raise your hand, and we might be able to figure out how to get you on video. But number 1, in times of crisis, right now, during this pandemic, the way we make decisions is often more important, or at least as important, as the decision itself. Let that sink in for a second. The way you and I make decisions, and I'm going to use myself as the example. I remember back in 2008, the financial crisis had just started to hit. We were much smaller at that particular time. The markets were just beginning to crash. And I was sitting in my office. I had my TV on, and I had my door shut. And this is a couple of weeks into the crisis. I hadn't really reacted to the crisis at that particular point yet. But I was listening and watching the markets crash, and I started to plan our next move, as any good leader would do, right? What are we going to do? Where am I going to cut costs? Where am I going to tighten my belt? Who am I going to let go? Whose hours am I going to cut? What am I going to do to make sure we get through this, right? I ran the spreadsheets. I knew the numbers. I knew what needed to be done. And then I walked out of that office and I made it happen. I made the decisions, delivered all of the decisions. I made the cuts. I laid the people off. I made the decisions that ended up saving us, which was good. But there was a real fallout the way in which I came to the conclusion of the decisions and delivered these decisions. Now, the good thing is on the backside of that, we came back stronger, we grew bigger, and as a result of that, and those decisions that I made. But here's the thing, at the same time, the way I delivered and made those decisions, I lost the trust of a lot of my people. The impact of that was felt for a long time. This is 2008, right, when this happened. And I would venture up until 2019, the lingering effects of making decisions behind closed doors created an environment of fear. Because I made the call, made the decision, made the call, delivered it, and it was probably the worst thing that I could have done. Yes, it saved us, but it also caused some internal issues. And I see this with organizations big and small. We've got to make the decisions, that's fine, but it's how we make the decision and how we deliver those decisions. So what was the problem? What did I end up doing wrong at that time? Again, it wasn't necessarily the decision I made. It was how I did it. I mean, I had a smaller leadership team at the time. And of course, I shared with the leaders what I was actually going to do. But then I came out, and again, I delivered it without any warning to the team. There was no discussion about what was going to happen. It was, here's the decision I have to make. I'm forced to make these decisions. Here's what's happening, and this is the impact. At the time, in 2008, I didn't even give time for discussion around, are there alternatives? I just felt as the leader that I had to make that call. Now, fast forward to our current circumstances. Again, this started 2-3 weeks ago. I would say that the team today here, and maybe you're feeling this as well, and the team from back then is feeling very, very different. But I took a different approach to this idea of the way in which I make decisions versus just the decision itself. And I did 3 things to get people prepared. And if you're a leader and you haven't done this, make sure you go back and do this. But number 1, I prepared the team. As soon as I got wind, or we got wind, that things were starting to slow down, some of our clients, the industries they're in, were starting to slow down, I brought the team together and started having the conversation. Look, here's what's happening. We see the spread of the pandemic, the virus that's going on. Here's the impact it could make. Not saying it will, but here's what could happen given that these things actually occur. It's going to be challenging for all of us. So step number 1 is I took the time to prepare my team this time for what could happen. The second thing is I shared with them. I gave them the options that we were considering, right? If this happens, here's what we may have to do. People in general, I've got some folks around here, and I think all of us to a certain extent, we need to have time to process. So number 1, I prepared them for changes. Things are happening in the economy. Number 2, I shared with them the things we were considering at the given times based on the information we had at that particular point. If this happens, we're going to do this. If this happens, we're going to cut hours here. If this happens, we're going to do this other thing here. And it really gave the team a little bit of sense of, I think, security, but I also think it gave them the time to process, to say, okay, if that happens, I need to have my own backup plan as well. And I think too often as leaders, as I did in 2008, I just came in like a bull in a china shop. Here's what we're doing, and let's move on. But this time, I think I took the time to prepare them in the right way. We've been sharing with them our options. And then the third thing, and this is critical, we listened to them. I listened to them. After I prepared them and shared, we kind of sat back and started to think about together ideas that we could do to help the whole organization. Look, we're in the space of people, right? We do recruiting, we do leadership training, we do sales training, we do talent optimization, but it all comes around people in one form or another. We knew things were going to slow down, so let's listen to our people, since we're in the people business. What ideas do they have? And I got to tell you, I was shocked at how many of the team came to us because we gave them time, we prepared them, and actually gave solutions or gave potential solutions for the better of the entire organization because we gave them the time and the foresight to think about some of these things. So again, prepare them, share with them, and then listen to them before we actually act. So we got to think about how we make decisions. The way I did it back in 2008, behind a closed door, coming out, this is the way it's going to be, let's go. That doesn't build any type of long-term commitment from your team for when this thing changes. So point number two. Point number two for me is in times of crisis, your decisions don't make who you are as a leader. They reveal who you are as a leader. So if you're a leader, thinking about the way that you react, if you're working for somebody or working as part of a broader team, take a step back and what is the crisis revealing in the leader that you or leaders that you support if you're HR, that you work for if you're somewhere in the business. Let's think about this for a second. If you have a lemon and you squeeze a lemon, it's a simple example. What comes out of that lemon? Well, lemon juice, right? I like to say lemonade, but you got to add stuff to it. We want to make lemonade out of lemons. If it's orange juice and you squeeze it and you squeeze that orange, you're going to get orange juice. When we have a situation, a pandemic like this, a crisis, and we get squeezed as leaders, what's inside is really going to come out for our teams to see. So in 2008, and I use myself as kind of the biggest example on this, I remember catching myself many, many times, and now I've heard other leaders say it here in the environment that we're in, large clients, small clients, HR folks, CEOs, this entrepreneur group that I lead and manage as well. There's nothing else I could do. That's the quote. I got to let you go. There's nothing else I can do. Back in 2008, I remember when I was letting people go, cutting hours, I had to cut pay. There was a number of things I did. Now I cut myself too, but there was a number of things that I did. But I must have said this idea of there's nothing I can do more than a dozen times. But here's the issues that I found with it and realized after the fact. When you kind of have that attitude of there's nothing I can do, number one, I have to admit that I'm incapable of making a decision. I was forced to make a decision based on all the stuff going on around me. I'm just incapable. And that's, in essence, that's the message that we're sending when we take that approach of there's just nothing I can do. What's the difference? Well, I don't know about you, but I don't want to follow a leader who isn't capable of making and sharing the tough decisions when the crisis comes up. Because think about it. People are going to see what's really inside leaders during times like this. Are you stepping up for them, or are you just saying, I don't have a choice? I don't want to follow a leader that doesn't have a choice, because we all have choice. There's an overuse saying, I use it too, but it so resonates to what's going on right now, right? We can't control what happens to us, the circumstances we find ourselves in right now, but we sure can control our response to it. So the response, it shouldn't be, at least in my opinion, this is what I did in 2008, there's just nothing I could do. The response needs to be, in light of what's going on, here's what the decisions we're thinking about, sharing it and getting some of that feedback and listening to your team is much different than saying, there's nothing I can do. I made the decision 2.5 weeks ago with my executive team to cut costs. That meant some layoffs, some brand new people that just joined us, because our clients just don't need the work right now until that comes back. But I made it in response to what was going on, or we made it in response to what was going on, but the delivery of it is very different. The second issue with this, there's just nothing I can do about it, is I had to, and I've already kind of mentioned this, is I've had to blame the crisis for the decision I have to make. I'm passing the buck again. I'm the one who's making the decision. My executive team is the one making the decision. We're making these decisions now to set us up for the future. People want clarity in times of crisis. Look, I want clarity in times of crisis, meaning I got to make a decision, go with it, and be flexible about it. We're going to talk about that here in a second. But we've got to understand that people need somebody to point the direction, to say, I got your back as long as I can. I'm going to make these hard decisions to save the entire organization, to set us up for success in the future than just, I had no control, I got to let you go. I get why we do that. And I did it again in 2008, but I'm not going to make that mistake again. And it's going to be very clear. Yes, it's an unfortunate circumstance. Yes, we've got to make hard decisions, but I don't know about you. I would rather follow that leader who's willing to make the decisions, not just gives up or just seems to give up by saying, I just had to do it. There's a big difference between those. So point number one, as I mentioned, right, in times of crisis, the way we make decisions sometimes matters even more than the decision we make, but they go hand in hand. Number two, the way we make the decision reveals who we really are. It's like squeezing that orange, squeezing that lemon. We've got to keep that perspective in mind. Or your leaders, if you're supporting leaders, they need to have that perspective in mind when communicating to you, when communicating to the broader team. Which brings me to this point number three. And this one can be difficult for some because as humans, we have some natural tendencies to look out only for ourselves. So my point number three is this: in times of crisis, it's your decision. Is your decision based on purpose, or is the decision showing your purpose? Now, let me explain what I mean. What's the litmus test that you use as a leader, as an individual, when making your decision? What's the criteria that you use, especially in the business context? I can't say in your personal life because it changes the game quite a bit. But as a leader or supporting leaders to make decisions, what's the litmus test that you used? So think about from a military perspective. If you think about a SEAL team or some type of special forces, or really anybody in the military, the number one thing at hand that they use as the litmus test to put all of their decisions against is the mission. Does this support the mission? That's kind of number one in the pecking order. Number two is, what does this mean to the team? We don't want to lose a team member, but unfortunately, and I hate to even say this, there are times where it happens in order to make sure that we accomplish the mission. And then third is the individual. So in times of crisis, do you have a hierarchy in how you're looking at making decisions? In 2008, I would have said, yep, I absolutely had a hierarchy. I mean, I made some decisions at that point to put myself in major debt in order to pay for folks. Absolutely the case. But if I was to really look back now in how I made the decisions, how I handled the decisions, it probably, and actually not even probably, it didn't come across as though I had this hierarchy in my decision making. Was I really focused on the mission, or was I focused on saving my ass? And at that particular time, and looking back at it now, and I see this in leaders, I had a conference call with 3 leaders yesterday, and I get it. The panic is serious. Companies could close. But are they focused on the mission and surviving for the purpose of the business, or are they focused solely on themselves? Now, that's a hard one to stomach, right? I made the call 3 weeks ago. I'm not going to take another paycheck until I get everybody back to where they were before this started to happen. All right. I've had people take pay cuts here to get prepared so we don't have to lose people. And the team came around and was willing to do that because the mission that we have as an organization was first and foremost. The team came together and made the decisions together to save each other, which is just incredibly, incredibly humbling for me to see as the business owner. And then we're looking at ourselves as individuals. I haven't had one person yet who hasn't been selfless in this and giving something up for the greater good of the organization. In 2008, in many other organizations right now, that is not happening because the hierarchy of decision-making really isn't working. This whole idea of self-interest serves very little purpose in the long term. Organizations don't sustain themselves. Now, I had somebody say to me yesterday when I was on a conference on a video with them, hey, you know what? It's not about me. I'm not naturally like that. And I got to call BS when it's BS, right? We all have a tendency to have this self-focused as leaders. I'm talking leaders, right? We have our teams to worry about. We have our companies to worry about. But think about when you have a picture, there's a group picture and you know you're in the picture. What's the first thing you look at when you look at that picture? You look at yourself, I look at myself, and if I like the way that I look, if you like the way that you look, right, it's a great picture. Even if somebody else has their mouth open, their eyes closed, making some funny face, we have a natural tendency to look at ourselves first. But in the long run in businesses, that doesn't work. It may work for the short term, but to build that long-term experience where your team will come around you, where your team wants to be part of your organization long-term, you've got to put your purpose, your people first. What's the mission? Who's the team? And this is hard to say when an individual, a sole proprietor, an entrepreneur is suffering, is struggling from a financial perspective. I'm not saying don't make the cuts. We did it. I'm not saying don't make the hard decisions and cut comp or cut hours or get rid of expenses or do something drastic. When it's appropriate to do, it's appropriate to do. But are you doing it to maintain your own lifestyle? And I would say that, although I don't think I maintained my own lifestyle, I kind of had that in the back of my mind in 2008. Now, these guys that I was talking to yesterday, two of them, I got that out of them. It was, what does it mean to me versus what does it mean to us? And I've taken a very different approach. We need to be intentional at this point about putting our teams before ourselves for the long-term viability of the organization. Yes, we need to make the decisions to make sure that the organization will actually survive. I get that, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. So that's point number 3. Point number 4, stick with me here. I just got 2 more, and then I want to wrap this up so that you've got some time to ask questions if you want to. Raise your hand. There's a little button that says speak. If you want to actually come on video, we'll try to get it to work. I don't know. But this one is another interesting one to me, and I had to reflect on this. And as I was sharing with some of my clients that were struggling with this idea of failure, either perceived failure or real failure in light of the pandemic and the decisions that we're making, I had to kind of take a step back before I answered and say, how am I making decisions? And how is it different today than it was in 2008? You know, what's happening when I think about this idea of failure? And here's how I laid it out. In times of crisis, like now, during this pandemic, failure in decision-making, follow me with this, failure in decision-making is determined by where you choose to stop. Let me give you an example of what I mean by this. First of all, doesn't matter who you are, every one of us makes bad decisions. We know that, right? But successful leaders, successful people in general, have a tendency to course correct very quickly. Make a bad decision, course correct. Make a bad decision, course correct. You could make a bunch of them in a row, but you got to be constantly course correcting. Failure comes when you don't course correct and you stop. And that's the fear a lot of us as leaders had. Now think about, let me go back to 2008 again, right? I didn't get ahead of what was going on. I saw the signs of the economy starting to slow down, our clients starting to pull back, the need of saving cash at that point for our clients was critical. But I waited to the last minute to try to get as much out of my team as I could up until the last minute. And that was my first mistake. I wanted to get the most out of the situation and keep the team going. But then at that point, I had to make the call, cut people, lay people off, cut costs and so forth. What happened is I made this false assumption that this one decision and this one action was the best approach. I thought I had to make the call, be done. At that point, as I said earlier, forced to make the call, forced to respond in a certain way and be done. And to me, that was failure. I look at it very differently today, and it ties in to how we're managing through this crisis itself. There's a quote that I love. I love these kind of quotes, that this is how we fail forward. So when I think about, here we are, March of 2020, it's not about making a decision and its success or failure. The problem with putting all of our bets on one decision, and sometimes as leaders, we don't even want to make a decision because we're afraid to make the wrong one. And I think I did that in 2008. The problem with that is if it's all based on one decision, you have a 50-50 chance of getting it right. If we make the decision and have a focus on course correcting and sharing that course correction with our team, you have a greater odds every time you do that to make the right decision for you and for your team. So here's how I broke out this idea of addressing failure and not getting caught up on this idea of failure. Roy, I'll answer your question here in just a second. But there was 3 steps that I took or am taking right now to avoid getting caught up in, am I making the right decision or not? Is this going to tank the company or not? Am I giving the right advice or not? Am I firing the right person or not? Which is harsh, I know, but you got to think about it this way. Number 1, I had to act fast. I couldn't wait like I did in 2008. In 2020, we saw the signs, the coronavirus is hitting. I pulled the management team together. We saw what was happening, and we immediately went into action. Even though it could be a hard, wrong decision, but we had to act. So we had 3 people that had just been hired 3 days before, or a week before this whole thing started. We elected to let those 3 people go. We didn't have the time. Really, we could run out of money in order to do the training the right way. We wanted to save that. So we acted quickly, made those changes. That was step number 1. Step number 2 is we were willing to fix fast. So 1, we acted quickly. Number 2, we were willing to fix fast. Here's what I mean by that. As this thing really started to come down and clients said, hey, we got to figure out what's happening before I continue to use your services. This is really, really important. We had to say, we absolutely get it. So I went and sat down and talked to my leadership team, and my leadership team all agreed that they would take a pay cut in order to make sure that we didn't have to let other people go. Well, as the pandemic came down, and then in the state of Michigan, which is where our headquarters is, the governor basically shut us down, like Ohio and New York and California, these other places. We had to think quickly again. We came back to the drawing table. They took a larger pay cut, and then we went and we had some other cuts throughout the organization, so we didn't have to lay somebody else off. So we didn't have to eliminate a position. We were willing to act fast. We were willing to fix fast. But here's the thing, and this is going to be tough for somebody. I've already mentioned it once. We were willing to focus on our purpose as an organization. And let me give you an example of what was meant here, why I bring this up. We have a particular individual within the organization who is in a role that we could probably stand to cut back on a little bit. When things are really busy, it's an absolutely critical role. But as things slow down a bit with our clients, it's a role that we as a leadership team said, you know what, we could cut back. They don't have to work full time. We could cut their hours, cut their pay as a result, and save some dollars. Well, it was discussed that this person's significant other had lost their job as well, putting them in a really tight predicament if we were to make some cuts. So as an organization, as a leadership team, we made the decision to focus on our purpose, to focus on the mission at hand of people living their purpose, and dug even deeper in other areas with the agreement of other people to maintain that individual's compensation at full, while others were willing to step up for that person without even knowing who that person is. and allow that to happen, because as an organization, we were living our purpose. And that purpose is people living their purpose. So we had to be willing to act fast. We had to be willing to fix fast, which is not something I was willing to do. And I really don't think in 2008 I focused on living our purpose, because I wasn't living my purpose. The organization didn't even have a clear purpose outside of making money. But that's really for a completely different discussion. And then this last point that I just want to mention quickly, because I'm going to talk about it next Thursday, and I hope this has been helpful for at least some of you. Number 5 is this idea of, in times of crisis, communication is the key. And I know that sounds simple. It's like, okay, I get it, right? I got to tell you, anybody who's watching this, anybody who's leading or is involved with a leader, or HR supporting leaders and leading your own teams, this has been, aside from focusing on the mission and some of the other things that I've already talked about, this has been an absolutely critical component to keeping the team together, right? To getting the team to make the sacrifices to fulfill our purpose and to take care of each other. I can't say enough about it. And here's the things that we're going to talk about next Thursday. Number 1, how we're communicating. What are the methods that we're actually using to keep informed? Number 2, how often am I, the leadership team, communicating with the team? And number 3 is how much we communicate. And by that, I don't mean how many times during the day. We'll talk about that. But how much information am I actually communicating about what's going on? And I mentioned this in the beginning. Part of this, as leaders and entrepreneurs, we fear things. We fear failure, as I've already talked about. We fear other people knowing that maybe things aren't going the best. The authenticity is not there with too many, right? This is really what's going on. These are the decisions that we have to make. In fact, a lot of leaders are afraid of the negative to get out. And I'll give you an example. One of our marketing team members, Jennifer Reisig, if you don't know her, go check her out, Reisig on LinkedIn, posted earlier this week, I got a 25% pay cut. But as you read through rest of her post, and I think people were shocked, oh my gosh, this company must be horrible to give her a 25% pay cut. We made that decision as a team. And as you read through her post, it talks about other people also took a 25% pay cut. Why did they do that? Because they believe in the mission of the organization. They believe in the direction, the clarity I believe that I'm giving them, that my leadership team is actually giving them. And she asked me first, can she post it? And I said, absolutely. If you feel, and I think I said, don't put the 25%, just put it out there. But she took a 25% pay cut, as did a big part of the staff, in order to make sure everybody else has a place to come back to when this coronavirus is over. So this idea of communication and the way we communicate and what we communicate as leaders has completely changed my view of how I should lead my team from 2008 to where we are now. Look, here's the deal. How you make a decision is sometimes more important than the decision itself. That's point number 1. Number 2, how you show up or don't show up after the decision is made impacts your team. Remember, that's where I talked about, is it, I just had to make the choice. I don't have any control in the situation. That's very different than saying, based on what's happening, I am making the decision to let you go or to cut your hours, or together we're going to make the decision to cut our hours in order to make sure that the company survives. In a time of crisis, the mission and the team come first. Point number 3, crisis will show them what's really inside of their leader. My team will see what's really inside of me. I'm getting squeezed right now. We all are as business owners. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Is it orange juice that's going to come out? And what's the color of that orange? Is it going to be about the team and the mission, or is it going to be about self-serving? Well, I hope that most of my team, if not all of them, would say that the decisions we've had to make are not self-serving. Number 4, we have to be willing to act on our decisions and not worry about failure. Failure, even in times of crisis, is not final, right? Now, I get some will have to shut the doors. But even beyond that, if they're an entrepreneur once, chances are they'll be an entrepreneur again. And I don't minimize that. I don't want that to happen to me. I don't want that to happen to anybody else. And number 5, the way we communicate, we will look more into this next week. So look, I don't know if this is helpful for anybody. This is some practical things that I've learned from 2001 to 2008 that I did wrong, that I am approaching in a very different manner this situation. In some ways it's worse, in some ways it's not as bad as what happened in 2008, and we're making those calls. Look, I have no problem in just saying, I'm not taking any pay actually until the team gets back to where they need to be. I'm focused on the team and the mission. But the way I'm doing it, the way I'm communicating, the way I'm making decisions is very different today than it's ever been in my life. And I'm almost 50 years old, right? And you would think I would have learned this a lot sooner. So I hope this has been helpful. If anybody wants a transcript of any of my notes, put it in the comments that you want it. Shoot me an email, link in with me, Facebook. It doesn't really matter. I'll make this all public. It's really no big deal to me. I just need to get it in a way that's cleaned up. I'll have one of my marketing team members put it in a way that might be helpful for you. Remember, next Thursday at 11 o'clock, we'll be talking about step number 2, and this whole idea of communication. If you have something that I haven't addressed that you want to see as part of this 4-part series, make sure you shoot that to me as well, and I'm happy to share that. This will also be on demand. Once this is over, you'll receive a link if you want to share it with anybody. There will never be a cost for this kind of stuff. Share it to those you think need it, and I hope it was helpful for you. So if there's no other comments or questions, I think I got your question answered, Roy, on the second point. Hopefully everybody could hear it. Otherwise, take care, stay safe, try not to go bonkers staying in your location, wherever you are, and we'll see you 1 week from today. Now, if I can figure out how to shut this thing off, we'll be in good shape. See you guys.